Hello. Oh, we got the mics back. We got the mics back. You know I like a good mic.
That's how we're starting the podcast today.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Big Money Stylist podcast. It's like 8 a.m. because that's how committed we are to this podcast. We both had such a busy week, and I was like, and I'm actually leaving town next week.
Same. You leave town Saturday. I leave next week.
When do you leave?
The 18th.
Yeah, I leave on tomorrow. So anyway, I was like, we are so committed to giving you guys content and value. We might have to play a repeat the following week.
We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. Maybe we'll do like something via cell phone and.
That'd be kind of fun though.
Yeah, I know. We'll meet up in Cancun and do a podcast. That's how committed we are.
You know what? First off, I feel like an idiot admitting this. I didn't realize Cancun was like different parts. Everyone's like, what part of Cancun? I'm like, what? Yeah, Cancun. What do you mean different parts?
Yeah, what part are you in? Do you know?
I barely know.
Because
Where
you fly
going?
into Cancun, but then there's like Playa del Carmen, and then there's like you can even go as far as like Tulum or.
And it's the Rivera. Isn't that the same thing?
They're all kind of within like an hour.
I don't know. Man.
Yeah.
I'm going to Cancun. I don't care. I got some super skimpy bikinis. Oh yeah.
Nice. I'm going with my family, so I'm going with the mom bikinis for this trip.
The momkinis?
Momkinis for this trip.
I'm going with my boyfriend, so I'm not.
There you go. Good for you. Good for you. I have those bikinis and I save those because otherwise my 14-year-old daughter thinks she can wear those bikinis, and I'm like, no, ma'am, you cannot wear that. And she'll be like, well, you are. I'm like, I'm an adult and I was with your dad. And then she'll be like, that's gross. And I'm like, that's how we made you.
Well, you're welcome for your life. Oh my God. What?
Anyway,
so
kids. So what are we talking about?
I'm really excited about today's topic actually because I feel like this is something that a lot of people struggle with in general.
Yeah.
Especially when you're like involved with us in the academy or you're really into growth and like growing yourself and businesses. And one of our artists actually asked us, she was like, I have a question for you guys. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with growth inside of knowing you're going to lose friends, knowing that family won't be supportive? How do you deal with the feelings of like loneliness, of isolation, and then even adding like another layer to it? How do you deal when you are the one growing, but your partner, will say husband because we're both women right now, and like your husband isn't? So you're like these
you
people
feel like you're
that
dragging them.
Yeah, like these people that we were friends with, unfortunately, like it doesn't serve us anymore. Like they're not going where we're going. So she's kind of like, how do you have that conversation without sounding like a total dick?
I think that you have to be very self-interested, to be honest with you. And I think a lot of us get stuck with wanting to make big moves because we're so worried about our current circle of influence. But sadly, like you might have a couple in that small circle that'll grow with you.
Yeah.
Or even like maybe they won't grow with you, but they have appreciation and respect for where you're going.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't want to go there. But then you have some that are like, if you flat out, like they would just drop you tomorrow. If you were like, hey, like I lost everything, like whatever, they would just flat out drop you. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. I think it's like finding the balance of like, okay, here's where I'm going and not getting so stuck in what other people think about you. Because I think that ultimately can kind of hold you back. And I think that people hold on to that story. They're like, how do you do that? I'm like, well, have you stepped outside? Are you still friends with those people? Are you going in that direction? Or are you just like thinking like, what would happen if I left these friends? Like, you know?
Well, and I think first off, you have to have, I call it like the come to Jesus conversations where you need to take a look at your friends and have an honest, like an honest conversation with yourself. Because I feel that sometimes we look at people that we've known for so long and we're like, but they're my best friends. I love them. They love me. But is that actually even true?
Right.
You might be only friends for like a particular instance, or like they might just be the friend that you go out and have drinks with. And even like Danielle has said, like, and I think what you're trying to say is like when you start having a certain level of success, guys, like yes, you're going to see friendships change and new friends come in, old friends leave, vice versa. But you also have to realize like, are these forever friends? Are they your friend because they truly love you and care? Do you have deep conversations? Do you talk about hard shit? Do they support you? Or are they just like
you have almost
the
like
party friends?
You have layers to your friends, right?
Absolutely.
And it's like as you grow as an individual, it's almost like your friends that you are really, really close with get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you're like the others. I mean, some friends you might have to completely cut off. There's been friends that I'm like, you're fucking Cancer. Like every time I'm around you, like I can't do it anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even I've had friends like that where I'm like, you're Cancer, and I kind of just distance myself for a while, and then I can see them and I'm like, oh, you're fun. I like you, and I'm not like so angry about it. But I realize I'm like, you're my friend that I can see a couple times a year, and that's about it.
Well, and I think that when we're inside of that place of growth, like even talking about feelings of like isolation and loneliness, like, yeah, you're going to feel that way, because I also think it depends on who you surround yourself with.
Right.
Because if you're surrounded with like-minded people who are all about growth, then yes, it's easy to like share and give ideas and go back and forth. But when you're with people who aren't necessarily on the same path as you, first off, that's okay. And
it doesn't have those conversations with them though.
No. And that's the thing. Like if you already know, like this is the group of friends where I can't have these conversations, then here's the deal. I think very often, like, yes, there are sometimes where you just have to be like, I'm like cutting you off. Like we're done. Totally. But it doesn't always have to be that way with every person. Sometimes, guys, it's like a slow exit. What do they call it, like in a party where you just like start making like an Irish exit?
Yeah, you just slow exit. Yeah,
you're making your way to the door. Like you leaving? Nope, going to the bathroom. Make your way close to the front door.
But I think it's hard too because there's friends that you're super close with that you feel like cross you, and those are the ones that you're like, this has to be a conversation or this is an ugly exit. Like it can't be a slow exit because like we were tight, we were good friends. Like you kind of fucked me over here, whatever it is. You know what I mean? And those are ones that you're like, I'm done. And I've had situations and relationships for me like that in the past, like probably 9 years ago when Garrett and I lost everything. There was a few friends that like they would do these jabs like on social media.
I fucking hate digs. I hate digs.
And I was like, dude, I'm going through so much shit. I have 2 kids. My husband just fucking like cheated on me. We have no money. We're borderline bankrupt. Like I'm leaving my religion, my bubble, like everything. I'm at my lowest low and you're making digs. Fuck you. And I was like, those type of people, I'm like, we were never friends. You're dead to me. And now like later I'm like, I don't know, that's kind of, but I still don't, I'm not like, I don't reach back out to those people. I'm like, no, like true colors showed up. Like when I was at my lowest of lows, like you weren't there asking me how I was. You were like, fuck you.
And I think actually, and I'll use you as a really good example because yes, you guys are wealthy. Like it's fine. Like we can address that. And I feel like it also has to be so hard for you because even like, how do you, it's almost like you have to be very careful to distinguish, like, is this person my friend because of me or do they love me because of the new house I bought or because of the things that I have? And that is a shitty place to be. Like, I can imagine, and I can't speak for you, like, I'm sure you've had days where you feel lonely or you're like, fuck all these people, like, whatever. Those feelings, guys, it doesn't go away whether you're a 10,000-aire, a 100,000-aire, like a millionaire. Like, it doesn't, those feelings will still come and go. But I feel it's also learning how to manage it and realizing, like, not everyone has to be your ride or die.
The more, like, Garrett and I have worked extremely hard to get to the level of success that we're at. And I think, whereas I used to get irritated with people, and I was having this conversation with my daughter the other day. She's like, my friend wanted to invite all these boys to our house and this and that. And I just feel like they just wanted to come to a cool house. And I was like, I'm like, here's what you're going to have to understand, Bailey. Like, there are going to be people that just want to come hang out with you because you got a cool house, you know?
Yeah.
I'm like, and they're not ones that get invited over very often. And I said, you know what? I have friends like that. And I used to get irritated and be like, they're using me and this and that. And then I'm like, no, I just have to accept them for the level that they're at. Is like, as much as that sounds bad, I'm like,
look, some people are shallow. Let's just call it. Some people.
I say hollow. Not shallow, but hollow. Like, there's no depth. There's just no depth. And it's like, I'm like, you're a sweetheart, but there's no depth there. And I just accept that. And then I'm not like bugged by it. I'm like, hey, how are you? So good to see you. And it's not, and you don't hold this like anger, grudge. Like you can't save everybody. So keep that in mind. Like as our students writing this question, I think when we're in this path of growth, we're kind of like, we almost get to this place of irritation where we want people to grow with us.
Why don't you see what I see?
Yeah. And then and even if it's a spouse or a best friend, and then you become almost angry and resentful towards them because you're like, why don't you fucking drink the Kool-Aid? Why aren't you coming with me? And like you have to understand where they're at, and like they're like, I don't see anything wrong. Like I'm good here. And when you come to that level of acceptance, you're kind of like, okay, I can grow at my own rate, and I'm going to create new relationships with other people and continue to climb that ladder. And I can still, appreciate these people for the role that they played in my life. And that's all you have to do.
And I think that's a really big thing. And I love that you just said that, because so often I feel that we need to put blame. And it doesn't matter, like, if you're the person, I can do this 2 ways. If you're the person who's taking digs at someone else, you are partially to blame in this as well. Or it could also be that if you're the person who's growing so quickly, you also take blame in this, that so often we want to place blame. We want to say, oh, well, she did this, which is why we're not friends. Well, she did this. And then all of a sudden everybody's pointing fingers and being a huge fucking dick about everything. When guys, no one has to take blame. Everyone does it, but no one has to. There doesn't have to be like a big blowout. It's like when a relationship ends and people are like, what happened? And you're like, nothing really happened. Like, it just didn't work anymore.
Right.
And people find that really hard to accept, but that happens with friendships too, and that's okay. There doesn't have to be a big blow up. Sometimes like it just doesn't serve you anymore, but what you said is be appreciative for the role they played, whether you love them, whether you hate them, whether it ended badly, whether you guys just kind of faded out. It doesn't have to be like they're fucking dead, they're pieces of shit. Like, hey, I love them for who they were. Because also this, if
you were there at one point too, you know?
And if you have a lot of people, or not a lot, but if you have like those certain people in your life that you're like, God, they just don't want to grow. If you're not willing to accept them, then you're also a shitty friend.
Right.
And that's a hard thing to hear. Now, accepting them for where they are at doesn't mean you have to be at that place. It doesn't mean you have to tolerate that behavior. It doesn't mean you have to approve of it. But it also means like you can't shit on them now because you feel superior, because that makes you an asshole too.
Well, and think about even family. Ooh, family, because like people will be like, well, I can't just like cut my mom out. Well, I can't just like cut my sister out. Well, I can't. Well, to be honest with you, like for me, when I was going through like so much with my husband and like everything, lost everything, had kids, and like I was like, even I felt, and it could have just been in my own head, I'm sure it was, but I even was like, I felt like my family was like, but what are you doing? What is going on? You know what I mean? And it was, even my mom, I felt like she was like at one point like so negative Nancy, and I was just like, and I literally, like I started my brand on social media, and I felt like my family was like, what is Danielle doing? Because nobody was really like doing that, and I was like, I'm fucking trying to pay the bills. That's what I'm doing. And I got to this place where I'm like, my family's like nagging at it. They think they're doing it to help and to love, right? Do you ever have people where they're like they say stuff and they think they're helping, and you're like, you're
making me feel worse.
You're not helping. You're putting scarcity in my mind. Like you're not helping, but they think they're helping and they're doing it out of love. And so I even had to get to a place where I was like, okay, they mean well, but guess where I got to go? I got to get the fuck out of here. And that's when I literally packed up my family. We moved to Arizona, and I blocked everybody in my family on social media. And they were so offended. They were like, why are, and they joke around about it. Like it was so, like I'd still go home for Christmas and hang out, and they'd be like, well, we'd like to see what Danielle's doing, but she blocked us. I'm like, yeah, I blocked you because you're kind of all assholes. I didn't really say that.
You're up my ass right now.
But I was like, yeah, you know, I just want to focus on what I'm doing, and I don't want to worry about like whatever anybody else thinks. And that's like all I would say. You know what I mean?
And not only that, another thing it could be, because like, for example, like I'm really close with my family. Like I'm FaceTiming my parents probably every couple days, like at minimum. Like we talk all the time. But even inside of that, guys, it could just be that you're like, hey, I love you and I want to keep this relationship and I want to keep talking, but there are certain conversations that we cannot have.
Yeah.
Because it goes, and I'll use like politics as like a really great one. If your parents are one way and you're the other way, and every time you talk about it, it ends up in a big fucking blow up because everyone's right and wrong, then maybe that just becomes one of those like business things like you just never discuss. And that might have to be it too. So you don't necessarily have to like fully cut them out.
Right.
But you also might have to place rules and limits, but then you also have to be comfortable like almost like instilling those rules. Like if they start talking about it, just say, hey, that's not really a conversation I want to have, but how about that? Like, how's this or how's that? And just change the topic.
Right. And it's like, you don't have to always like agree on everything, and that's fine. Like for me, like with my family, like I left the church I was in, and my family is like diehard. Like they were like, hey, like to the point where like the Mormons believe when you die, like if you're not Mormon, like you don't get to be with your family like forever. I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I believe that. I don't believe just because you're like checking the box and you're like doing the rules that you have all the glory and you're with you for free. Yeah, like I'm like, I don't believe that. I'm like, so I'm out. And I felt like my family was like, oh my God, that's when they were like, oh my God, what is she doing?
Yeah.
Eternal damnation. Like, I'm like,
that's dark.
I don't agree with that. And so now it's like, even with my family, like now we're good. Like my parents still preach church to me. They send me like script, like those like little booklets and stuff. And so does Garrett's mom, like every week. No, I'm kidding. I'm not kidding you. And I am always like, thanks, not going to read it. Like, I don't care. Like they believe in it and they're passionate about it. And that's fine. I like we're in this place where like, we're cool with where we're at, and we can respect one another. And I don't have my family blocked anymore, by the way. It wasn't.
Everyone's going to check right now.
It was more about like literally, and I take full accountability for this. I'm like, I think I was worried too much about what they think, and I needed to just distance them. You know what I mean?
So then let me ask you this. What about spouse-wise? I feel like that you and Garrett, I won't say lucky because I hate the word, but I'll just use it for now. Like you guys are very lucky that you're both very growth-oriented people.
But we weren't.
So, but what happens if, like, for example, like this artist where she's like, shit, like I'm growing and I'm like, this is where we're headed. But my husband is like, no, all these people are still cool. Like, it's fine. We're good here.
So it's so funny because Garrett and I, he's like Mr. Motivational Speaker. So he's a phenomenal speaker, but he always, from the time we got married, actually, he'd always, like, when we were going to church, he'd be like, you're 10 minutes late. I can't believe you're 10 minutes late. Like, he was always trying to, like, he wanted me to be in church and he wanted me to grow. Like, I was like, dude,
That's so funny knowing him now.
Yeah,
like, what?
Exactly. Like, he would get mad at me and kind of judge you and be like, I can't believe you're late. I'm like, okay.
You're like, you married me like this.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, okay. But then even later, like when we were going through hard times, he'd be like, you should read this self-help book and you should read this. And I was like, it made me so angry. I was like, you should go work on yourself. I don't need this shit. And I, like, that doesn't work. So I see it where people are like, hey, let me give you this book to read because I'm, like, much better than you. I'm like,
because
here,
then you feel like
but
the
let
person
me help you. Like,
then you literally feel like the person is looking at you and saying, like, there's something
like
wrong
there's
with you
broken.
here. You need to fix.
And
no one wants to feel like they're being told they're broken.
And I was like that. And even like when our marriage wasn't great, he'd be like, we need to go to counseling. I'm like, you need to go to counseling, sir. And I finally got to this place
you were the dick, kind of.
I was that person that's like, no, I'm good right here. But it went both ways. Garrett had to accept that I grow in a different way, right?
Yeah.
And what he was doing wasn't working. And it was funny because he literally was always trying to get me to like read books and scriptures and do all this stuff he was doing. And I was like, no. And it wasn't until like I was like, I don't know if I want to kind of be married to you, that I really had to like find myself. And that's when I found a lot of growth in myself. And that's actually when as crazy as it sounds, when our marriage was on the line and we didn't know if we were going to stay married, and I started working on myself, and all of a sudden Garrett started working on himself, we kind of just came back together, right? And then we started to work on our relationship. So sometimes I think like you want to pull your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whatever, and you're like, come with me, but that doesn't work. They have to want it for themselves, right? And if they don't, like, you either have to be in a place where you're like, I love you for who you are. And then even then they might grow out of that, but they might grow at a different rate. So I just think my only advice is like, if you feel like you're constantly like pulling that person or trying to get them, perhaps just work on you and don't worry about them and lead by example and see what happens. Out of leading by example, they might be like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. What is she doing? Like, I want to be more involved. I want to start something new. I want to be inspired or whatever it is.
And not only that, another thing you can do is find common interests. Because I feel like so often we're like, hey, I love this. You should love this. I love this.
Right.
Love this. Danielle, love it. Why don't you? Danielle, just love it. No,
I don't want to
love
serve.
it. Exactly. And then all of a sudden they're like, why are you cramming that shit in my face? Like, I don't want that. You're driving me insane. And I feel like I'm such a stubborn human. I'm like a really great example of this. I love reading. The minute someone is like, you have to read this book, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to. That actually, I don't even want to. Garrett did that to me once. He knows I did it and it's fine. But it was the book Pitch Anything, which is a phenomenal book. I actually have read it since. But he was like, you have to read it, mandatory reading. And I was like, I hear you. I don't respond well to that.
Yeah.
I read like 4 pages and then I was straight up like, nah, I'm not reading it. It took me like a year and a half to finish a phenomenal book, by the way, only because I was being forced.
Stubborn.
I was, a stubborn motherfucker.
Yeah,
I can admit it. Like, I was not great.
I've done that.
Yeah, but it's even things like that. Like, I knew it was good for me. I knew that I needed to read it, but I didn't want to because someone was forcing it. So maybe you find a common interest.
Right.
And yes, I know it's going to be like, you're going to have like almost like ulterior motives. Like, I get it, but don't say that to them. Like, if it's a book you want them to read or whatever, maybe you just start playing it in the morning.
You know what I find too is like, for me, Garrett, I mean, he doesn't lift anymore, but he went through it. He was really inspired for a minute. And I'm just using this as an example. Like, I did my fitness competition. I was lifting, I was doing this. All of a sudden, Garrett's like, God, I think I want to lift. And I never was like, babe, you should lift. Like, it's amazing. He surfs. He has a great body. I was like, I don't care, whatever. But like through my example, he was like really inspired. So even then, you never know. Like, he doesn't lift anymore. I went back to surfing. But we kind of had that, like, he had a little bit of respect for like what I had done. Cause he's like, wow, I've never actually lifted like that. I did like CrossFit. Like, how you lift, it's very like, you have to have great form. Like, it's not just like swinging weights around. He's like, I have a lot of respect for like what you're doing now. And then it was like, so you can always have common ground where you meet places like that, and you just have to lead by example. Honestly, as a mom, I feel like a lot of times I'm fucking up as a mom. I'm like, I'm an awful mom. I don't know. I work too much. I don't work enough. I'm not, like, their homework's not done. I don't tuck them in at night. Like, but then I'm like, you know what though? Like, you love your kids. You lead by example, and I think that people will take note of that more than they will if I'm like, Bailey, you have to do your homework. You have to do this. You have to work hard. If I work hard, she'll take note that I'm working hard. And hopefully that's something that I'm leading by example with even my children.
And another thing, guys, because I know we've been talking about like friends and what you do with family and friends and things like that. So even if you're like, hey, I'm ready to drop these friends because it's not serving me, but your husband or your partner or whoever is like, they're still good for me, that might just be something that you honestly have to accept, but it doesn't mean that you have to continue to pour into those people. And I realize that sometimes you feel like slighted and you feel wrong. You feel like wronged by these people. But if you all of a sudden you're like, no, we're not hanging out with them. We're not doing this. They're out of our lives. You're actually going to end up pushing your spouse away, because now that feeling of like loneliness and isolation that you have, they're going to feel it 10 times worse. Because now not only are you banning your fucking all of your friends, now the wife and partner isn't on their side either.
Right.
So that's where I say, if you really start to go through and like find more common interests, that will actually benefit you better than just trying to like put your foot down and like making people like dead.
Right. And you know what? When I went through a phase too where I was like, you're dead to me. And then it was like, it caused more stress on me. So I would consider like come to this place of like love and appreciation and just know that like you're going to work on you. And that's all you have to do is work on you, worry about you, and people will notice. And that's really all you can do. Like, yes, you want to put effort if it's your spouse, you want to like, put effort into your relationship. But in the end, the best thing you can do is lead by example. So I would challenge you guys this next week, what relationships are you in, whether it's business, personal, whatever it is, family, like whatever it is, where do you need to kind of just, slowly exit, or possibly just kind of work on you and focus on what you need to do right now?
So thank you guys for listening to the Big Money Stylist podcast. If you want more information on the classes that we hold, which does include things like this, business, personal, and hair, all of it, go to nbr.education. And we have tons of information about all of the classes that we have.
Can I do a spoiler? Another teaser? A small spoiler.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm nervous about whatever.
No, it's the same thing. So we have some more education coming soon. So make sure that you're on our email list. That's all I'm really going to say is it's going to be a really cool 5-day virtual event for all hairstylists. And it might be geared towards the business, marketing, and sales. That's all I'm going to say.
And thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.